A father gets angry with his lazy son and forces him to marry a homeless woman as punishment, but he never expected what his son would do to him. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching this video from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Enjoy the story, everyone. The roar of the engine drowned out the police sirens for a fleeting moment as Nathan Barrett's custom Lamborghini tore through Boston's empty streets at 3 in the morning. The speedometer needle pushed past 120 mph, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, a wild grin plastered across his face. The adrenaline was the only thing that made him feel alive anymore. "They're gaining on us, man," shouted Tyler from the passenger seat, his voice barely audible over the engine's howl. Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror at the flashing blue and red lights. "Watch this," he said, yanking the wheel sharply to the right, sending the car down a narrow side street. The son of construction magnate Richard Barrett had perfected the art of escape. He knew every alley, every shortcut, and every blind spot in the city's surveillance network, or so he thought. When the roadblock appeared ahead, Nathan's cocky smirk vanished. Trapped between the advancing patrol cars behind and the barricade before him, he reluctantly eased off the gas pedal and raised his hands in surrender. 3 hours later, Richard Barrett strode into the police precinct, his custom Italian shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. At 58, he commanded attention without effort, his silver hair impeccably styled, his tailored suit radiating wealth and influence. But tonight, the lines around his mouth were etched deeper than usual, his patience worn thin. "Mr. Barrett, your son has been processed. The charges include illegal street racing, reckless endangerment, exceeding speed limits, and evading police." The sergeant seemed almost apologetic. But considering this is his first official offense, Richard knew what came next. A sizable donation to the police charity fund, a few calls to the right people, and this first offense would disappear like all the others had. The money wasn't the issue. It was the principle. When Nathan emerged from the holding cell, his designer clothes rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. He wore the smirk of someone who knew he was untouchable. "Let's go," Richard said coldly, not bothering to look at his son. The ride to their Beacon Hill mansion was silent. Nathan stared out the window of his father's Mercedes, bored and unrepentant. Only when they pulled into the circular driveway did Richard finally speak. "This ends now." Nathan rolled his eyes. "Dad, it's fine. Nobody got hurt. 23 years old, final semester at Harvard Business School, a spot you barely deserved and certainly haven't earned. And instead of preparing to take over the company I've built from nothing, you're getting arrested like some common delinquent. You could have just left me there if I'm such a disappointment," Nathan shot back. Richard's hand slammed against the steering wheel. "You think this is a joke? You have no idea what it means to work for something, to struggle, to build. Everything has been handed to you on a silver platter, and you've squandered every opportunity. If you're finished with the lecture, I'm finished with your behavior," Richard cut in. "From now on, things will be different." Nathan laughed. "What are you going to do, cut me off? We both know you won't." Richard stared at his son, the spitting image of himself at that age, yet lacking every quality that had made Richard successful. Where had he gone wrong? After his wife Diana had suffered complications during Nathan's birth that prevented them from having more children, perhaps they'd overcompensated, indulging their only son to a fault. "Go to bed," Richard said finally. "We'll discuss this in the morning." But Richard Barrett didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his study nursing a glass of scotch, thinking about the young woman he'd noticed several times near his downtown office building. She couldn't have been older than 20, thin and weathered beyond her years, yet carrying herself with unusual dignity. While other homeless individuals he encountered were either aggressive or defeated, she was different. Eyes bright with intelligence, never begging, just quietly selling hand-drawn sketches to passers-by. Richard had bought one once, a remarkably detailed cityscape that now sat framed on his desk. When he'd asked her name, she'd said simply, "Emma." The idea that began forming in Richard's mind that night was unprecedented, perhaps cruel, definitely manipulative, but desperate times called for desperate measures. His son needed more than another lecture or punishment. He needed a complete transformation. The next morning, Richard dispatched his most discreet security personnel to locate the girl and bring her to his office, not by force, but with the promise of a legitimate job opportunity and a meal. When Emma Reynolds arrived that afternoon, she was clean but clearly wearing her only set of presentable clothes. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her green eyes wary as she took in the opulent corner office that overlooked the Boston Harbor. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Reynolds?" Richard said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "It's just Emma," she replied cautiously. "Your man was pretty vague about why you wanted to see me." Richard nodded. "I have a proposition for you, one that could change your life completely." "I'm not interested in anything illegal," she said immediately. "Nothing illegal," Richard assured her, "but certainly unconventional." He observed her carefully as he laid out his plan. Emma listened without interruption, her expression carefully controlled, betraying neither shock nor eagerness. When he finished, she remained silent for so long that Richard wondered if she was going to respond at all. "Let me make sure I understand," she finally said. "You want me to pretend to be your son's fiancé, help him become responsible, and in exchange you'll provide me with housing, education, and financial security." "Not pretend," Richard clarified. "Actually marry him. A real commitment, legal and binding. If you succeed in helping him turn his life around, everything I promised becomes yours permanently, whether you stay married or not." Emma's gaze hardened. "So I'd be what? Part rehabilitation counselor, part prostitute?" Richard flinched at her bluntness. "I see it more as a mutually beneficial arrangement. My son gets the wake-up call he desperately needs, and you get the chance you never had. And if I refuse? Then you walk out that door, no harm done. I'll even give you $1,000 for your time today." Emma stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. A city that had shown her little kindness since she'd escaped the foster home where she'd suffered years of abuse. Life on the streets was brutal, especially in Boston winters. She'd managed to avoid the worst fates that befell many homeless young women, but her future prospects were bleak. "I have conditions," she said without turning around. Richard leaned forward. "Name them. I want everything in writing. The apartment, the education funding, the money, all of it secured in my name regardless of the outcome. Done. And I want to meet him first. If he's completely insufferable, I walk away." Richard smiled for the first time. "That seems fair." Emma finally turned to face him. "One more thing. Don't expect me to be some doormat who'll tolerate being mistreated, no matter how much money is involved. I wouldn't have chosen you if I thought you were a doormat, Emma. That's precisely why you're perfect for this." The following evening, Richard invited Nathan to dinner at Menton, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. Nathan arrived half an hour late, irritated at being summoned. "What's so important that it couldn't wait until—" Nathan stopped abruptly when he saw the young woman seated beside his father. Despite her simple black dress, probably the most expensive thing she'd ever worn, there was something striking about her. "Nathan, I'd like you to meet Emma Reynolds," Richard said smoothly. "Your future wife." "My what?" Nathan's jaw dropped as he stood frozen beside the table, attracting curious glances from nearby diners. "Sit down, son," Richard commanded quietly. "You're making a scene." Nathan lowered himself into the chair across from Emma, his eyes never leaving her face. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I've never been more serious," Richard replied, signaling for the waiter to pour the wine. "Emma and I have reached an arrangement that I believe will benefit everyone involved." Emma met Nathan's incredulous stare with cool composure. Up close, she could see the privilege in every aspect of his appearance, from his casually expensive watch to his perfectly styled hair. Handsome, certainly, with his father's strong jawline and his mother's blue eyes, but with a petulance that marred his features. "An arrangement," Nathan repeated, his voice rising. "Dad, I don't know what kind of midlife crisis you're having, but you can't just—" "Actually, he can," Emma interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "And if you'd let him explain before throwing a tantrum, you might understand why." Nathan's mouth snapped shut in surprise, unused to being spoken to so directly. Richard outlined his ultimatum with businesslike efficiency. Nathan would marry Emma within the month and demonstrate meaningful change in his behavior, or he would be cut off completely. No trust fund, no position in the company, no financial support of any kind. "This is insane," Nathan hissed, leaning across the table toward his father. "You can't force me to marry some random—" "Homeless woman," Emma supplied when he faltered. "That's what you were going to say, right?" Nathan had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "I don't even know you. And yet you've already judged me," Emma replied. She turned to Richard. "Mr. Barrett, could you give us a moment alone?" Richard seemed surprised but nodded, excusing himself to take a call outside. Once he was gone, Emma leaned forward. "Let's be clear about something. I don't want to marry you any more than you want to marry me. But unlike you, I don't have the luxury of turning down opportunities that could change my life." "So you're just after my father's money," Nathan scoffed. "And you're not," Emma countered. "The difference is I'm willing to work for it. What exactly do you do besides waste it?" Nathan's face flushed with anger. "You don't know anything about me. I know enough. Prestigious university you barely attend, expensive cars you crash, parties, drugs, women. Stop me if I'm getting anything wrong." He glared at her. "What makes you think you can fix me?" Emma laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily transformed her face, revealing a glimpse of the carefree girl she might have been under different circumstances. "I don't," she said. "Only you can fix yourself. I'm just providing the incentive. And what's in it for you besides the money?" "A chance," she said simply. "Something I've never really had." Something in her tone made Nathan pause. For just a moment he looked at her, really looked at her, and saw beyond the surface. He saw the hardness in her eyes that came from years of survival, but also something else, a determination that was almost familiar. When Richard returned to the table, he found them in a silent standoff. "Have you two come to an understanding?" he asked. "Not exactly," Nathan replied, his eyes still on Emma. "But I have a proposal of my own." Richard raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. If I'm going to consider this outrageous plan, I want to see what she's made of first." Nathan turned to his father. "You're asking me to tie my life to a complete stranger. I deserve to know if she's worth it." "And how do you propose to determine that?" Richard asked warily. A slow smile spread across Nathan's face. "A race." Emma's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flickered with interest. "Absolutely not," Richard stated firmly. "Your reckless driving is exactly what led us here." "Not on the streets," Nathan clarified. "At Brookline Circuit. Controlled environment, completely legal. If she can keep up with me on the track, maybe, just maybe, I'll consider your insane arrangement." Richard looked to Emma. "You don't have to agree to this." To everyone's surprise, Emma smiled. "What time should I be there?" The following afternoon, Nathan arrived at the private racing track outside Boston, confident that his little test would send the girl running back to wherever his father had found her. He'd been racing on this track since he was 16. He knew every curve, every straightaway. He was inspecting his Ferrari when a cab pulled up at the entrance. Emma stepped out wearing jeans, a simple t-shirt and boots. Practical clothes for driving, not the attire of someone trying to impress. "I was half expecting you not to show," Nathan called as she approached. "I'm full of surprises," she replied, eyeing the Ferrari with professional interest. "Nice machine, 488 Pista." Nathan blinked in surprise. "You know cars." "I know a lot of things." She circled the vehicle, her fingers hovering just above the gleaming red surface. 7-speed dual-clutch transmission, 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds, 710 horsepower. "Impressive Google search before you came," Nathan mocked, though he was slightly unsettled by her knowledge. Emma just smiled. "Where's my car?" Nathan gestured to a slightly older model Ferrari parked nearby. "Same basic setup, just not quite as powerful. I figured we'd keep things relatively even." "How considerate," Emma murmured, already moving toward the vehicle. Richard arrived just as they were preparing to start, watching with evident anxiety as track officials explained the rules. 5 laps, clean racing, first across the finish line wins. As they settled into their respective cars, Nathan felt a surge of confidence. Whatever this girl thought she knew about cars, there was no substitute for experience. He'd teach her a lesson, and then his father would have to abandon this ridiculous scheme. The starting lights flashed from red to green, and both cars shot forward, engines screaming. Nathan took an early lead, pushing his Ferrari to its limits on the first straightaway. A quick glance in his rearview mirror showed Emma following his line exactly, staying close. Too close. On the first major curve, Nathan braked later than was strictly safe, expecting to gain more distance. Instead, Emma matched him move for move, taking the inside line and nearly pulling alongside him. By the third lap, Nathan was no longer thinking about teaching anyone a lesson. He was fighting to maintain his increasingly tenuous lead. Emma drove with a precision that belied her apparent lack of formal training, finding racing lines that Nathan hadn't considered. On the final lap, approaching the last series of curves, Nathan made a crucial error, braking too late and drifting wide. Emma seized the opportunity, slipping past on the inside and accelerating out of the turn with perfect timing. She crossed the finish line 2 car lengths ahead. When they both pulled into the pit area, Nathan sat motionless in his car, stunned by what had just happened. Emma was already out of hers, removing the racing helmet and shaking out her auburn hair. Richard approached his son's car and tapped on the window. "Are you going to sit there all day?" Nathan finally emerged, his face a mixture of shock, annoyance, and, most surprisingly, respect. "Where did you learn to drive like that?" he demanded as he approached Emma. She shrugged. "Here and there. Spent some time with a street racing crew in South Boston when I was 16. The leader let me practice on his cars when I showed aptitude." "You never mentioned you were a professional racer," Richard said, looking both impressed and concerned. "So you never asked," Emma replied simply. "And I'm not professional, never had the opportunity, but I've always understood machines better than people." Nathan was staring at her with new eyes. "Why would someone with your skills be homeless?" "Because skill doesn't matter when you don't have a birth certificate, social security number, or high school diploma," she answered matter-of-factly. "Can't get a legitimate job without documentation. Can't get documentation without an address and money. It's a vicious cycle." The three stood in silence for a moment, the dynamics between them subtly shifting. Nathan looked from Emma to his father, then back again. "One race doesn't change anything," he said finally, but his tone lacked conviction. "It changes everything," Richard countered. "You laid down the challenge, and she met it. More than met it." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Fine, I'll go through with this farce, but don't expect me to pretend it's real." "I don't need you to pretend," Emma said quietly. "I just need you to try." As they walked back to their respective vehicles, Nathan found himself watching Emma's confident stride, the way she nodded respectfully to the track officials, the lack of triumph in her demeanor despite her victory. For the first time, he wondered if there might be more to his father's plan, and to Emma Reynolds, than he had initially assumed. The Barrett Estate's East Wing had been empty since Nathan moved into his own penthouse downtown 3 years ago. Now, as Emma stood in the doorway of what would be her suite of rooms, she struggled to maintain her composure. The bedroom alone was larger than any space she'd ever occupied, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking meticulously landscaped gardens. "Is it suitable?" Richard asked, watching her reaction carefully. "It's excessive," Emma replied honestly. "But yes, it's suitable. Diana will help you settle in. She's eager to meet you." Emma had almost forgotten about Nathan's mother. "Does she know about our arrangement?" "She knows enough," Richard answered cryptically. "Diana has her own concerns about Nathan's behavior." After Richard left, Emma explored the suite, bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom with a tub large enough to swim in, and a walk-in closet larger than the homeless shelter where she occasionally sought refuge during Boston's harshest winter nights. The closet was already filled with clothes in her size, simple but elegant pieces from high-end brands, price tags removed but clearly expensive. The presumption irritated her, even as she ran her fingers over fabrics finer than any she'd ever owned. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Hello? May I come in?" Diana Barrett was everything Emma had expected in Richard's wife, poised, elegant, and obviously wealthy. But there was a warmth in her eyes that her husband lacked. "I'm Diana," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Welcome to our home." Emma braced herself for condescension or hostility. Instead, Diana's smile seemed genuine, if cautious. "Thank you for having me," Emma replied formally. Diana glanced at the open closet. "Richard can be overwhelming in his thoroughness. If you don't like any of these choices, we can shop together." "They're fine," Emma said quickly, uncomfortable with the idea of accepting more. Diana nodded, respecting her reticence. "Nathan will be joining us for dinner. 7 o'clock in the main dining room. Richard has meetings until then." She paused. "May I ask you something directly, Emma?" Emma tensed. "Of course. Are you doing this solely for what Richard has offered you?" The question was asked without judgment, but Emma considered carefully before answering. "Would you think less of me if I said yes?" Diana smiled sadly. "No. I'd think you were being honest and practical." "Then yes, that's a large part of it," Emma admitted. "But I also—" She hesitated. "I know what it's like to waste potential. I see that in your son." Diana's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "You're very perceptive." "I've had to be." When Diana left, Emma showered in the luxurious bathroom, letting hot water cascade over her for longer than was strictly necessary. Survival on the streets meant military quick showers at shelters or public facilities. This uninterrupted warmth felt like unimaginable luxury. She chose a simple navy dress from the closet, applied minimal makeup from the provided supplies, and precisely at 7 made her way downstairs. Nathan was already at the table, slouched in his chair and scrolling through his phone. He glanced up when she entered, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her transformed appearance. "You clean up well," he said, the compliment undermined by his tone of surprise. "So you don't," Emma replied, nodding at his rumpled shirt and unshaven face. Nathan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I didn't realize this was a formal occasion." "Every dinner is a formal occasion in this house," Diana said as she entered, casting a disapproving look at her son's attire. "You used to understand that." Richard arrived last, his commanding presence immediately changing the atmosphere. Dinner proceeded with strained politeness, Richard inquiring about Emma's education. Interrupted was her diplomatic response, and interests beyond cars. "Mathematics," she said, surprising everyone at the table. "I've always had a facility with numbers, patterns, equations, probabilities." "Yet another surprising talent," Nathan commented. "Racing, math. What's next, quantum physics?" "Actually, I find theoretical physics fascinating, though I've only been able to study it through books at the public library," Emma replied without missing a beat. "Self-education has its limitations." Richard looked pleased. "Harvard has an excellent mathematics department. Once the marriage is official, we can arrange for you to take placement exams." The word marriage hung in the air. Nathan stabbed at his steak with unnecessary force. "And when exactly is this joyous event supposed to take place?" he asked sarcastically. "Next Saturday," Richard replied calmly. "Small ceremony, family only. Judge Wilson will officiate." Nathan choked on his wine. "Next Saturday? That's 10 days from now." "Is that a problem?" Richard challenged. "Do you have pressing engagements?" Before Nathan could respond with what would surely have been a cutting remark, Diana intervened. "Emma, have you ever thought about what kind of ceremony you might want? Every girl dreams of her wedding day." Emma set down her fork. "I haven't been in a position to dream of much, Mrs. Barrett. A roof that doesn't leak has generally been the extent of my aspirations." The blunt statement silenced the table momentarily. "Well," Diana recovered, "we'll make it lovely regardless." Nothing ostentatious but dignified. Later that night, unable to sleep in the too-soft bed, Emma wandered the darkened hallways of the Barrett mansion. She found herself in a library 3 times the size of her former bedroom at the group home, walls lined with leather-bound volumes from floor to ceiling. She was examining a first-edition mathematics text when a voice startled her. Insomnia or snooping? Nathan stood in the doorway wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking more relaxed than she'd yet seen him. "Insomnia," Emma answered truthfully. "Though I admit I was curious about what your family considers essential reading." Nathan approached, glancing at the book in her hands. "Principia Mathematica. Heavy stuff for midnight browsing. Your father has an impressive collection." "He collects things he thinks make him look intelligent," Nathan said dismissively. "I doubt he's read a 10th of these books." Emma replaced the volume carefully. "And you? Have you read them?" "More than he thinks I have." Nathan moved to a cabinet in the corner and withdrew a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Drink?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. He poured 2 fingers in each glass and handed one to her. "To unholy matrimony," he said sardonically, raising his glass. Emma didn't drink. "Is that really how you see it?" Nathan sipped his whiskey. "How else should I see it? My father is basically blackmailing me into marrying a stranger. And I'm marrying someone who clearly resents the arrangement. We're both sacrificing something. Except you get everything you want, and I lose my freedom." Emma's eyes flashed. Freedom to do what exactly? Destroy expensive cars, get arrested, waste your education? She set down her untouched glass. You have no idea what real sacrifice looks like. Nathan studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, enlighten me. Emma hesitated, unused to sharing personal details, but something about the quiet library and the late hour loosened her usual reserve. I was 5 when my parents died in a house fire. No relatives stepped forward, so I entered foster care. She spoke matter-of-factly, as if reciting someone else's history. My first home seemed okay, until the foster father started coming into my room at night. Nathan's expression changed, anger flashing across his features. I was moved 7 times in 12 years, Emma continued. Some homes were neglectful, some abusive. The last one was the worst. I ran away at 17 and never looked back. That doesn't explain your math skills or your driving, Nathan said softly, not dismissing her story but genuinely curious. A small smile touched Emma's lips. My second foster home, the only good one, lasted 8 months. The father was a community college math professor. He noticed I had an aptitude and encouraged it. Then his wife got sick, and they couldn't keep me. She shrugged. As for driving, that came later. Living on the streets, you find unusual ways to survive. By street racing? By being useful to people who protect you, she corrected. I could drive. I was good with numbers, both valuable skills in certain circles. Nathan was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. Did you ever... He hesitated. Were you ever a prostitute? Emma finished bluntly. No, not that I judge those who make that choice to survive. I was fortunate to find other options. They sat in silence, the tension between them subtly altered. Why did you agree to my father's plan? Nathan finally asked. Besides the obvious material benefits, Emma considered the question. Because for the first time someone saw value in me beyond what I could do for them immediately. Your father's motives aren't pure, but his offer represents something I've never had. A future. Nathan nodded slowly, seeming to understand. And what exactly do you expect from me in this arrangement? Effort, Emma said simply. Not perfection, just genuine effort. Something flickered in Nathan's eyes. Not quite agreement, but perhaps the beginning of consideration. I should get some sleep, Emma said, rising from her chair. Apparently I have a wedding to prepare for. She was halfway to the door when Nathan called after her. Emma, that race at Brookline? He hesitated. No one's ever beaten me on that track before. Emma smiled, recognizing the admission for what it was, a small, reluctant offering of respect. Get used to it, Barrett, she said over her shoulder. I'm just getting started. The wedding was exactly as Diana had promised, small, dignified, and utterly surreal to Emma. Standing before Judge Wilson in the Barrett's immaculate garden, exchanging vows with a man she barely knew, Emma felt as though she were watching someone else's life unfold. Nathan, to his credit, played his part convincingly. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, clean-shaven and sober, he spoke his vows clearly and slipped the simple platinum band onto Emma's finger, without hesitation. If the dozen guests noticed anything amiss, they gave no indication. You may kiss the bride, the judge announced. Emma braced herself for either a cold, perfunctory peck or some form of uncomfortable display. Instead, Nathan surprised her. Leaning in, he whispered, "May I?" just before his lips met hers. A question, offering her control even in this orchestrated moment. The kiss was brief, but not unkind, his hand gentle against her waist. When they separated, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of their shared circumstance. The celebration afterward was equally restrained, champagne and cake in the garden. Polite conversation with Richard's closest business associates and their wives, all of whom studied Emma with poorly disguised curiosity. So refreshing to meet a young bride who isn't from our usual social circles, one elegantly attired woman commented, her smile not reaching her eyes. However did you two meet? Before Emma could respond, Nathan appeared at her side, his arm sliding around her waist with practiced ease. Emma left me in the dust at Brookline Circuit, he said, the pride in his voice sounding remarkably genuine. I had to marry her to salvage my ego. The woman laughed uncertainly, clearly not knowing whether to believe him. It's true, Diana confirmed, joining the conversation. She's quite the driver. Nathan's met his match in more ways than one. Later, as the sun set and the last guests departed, Emma stood alone at the edge of the garden, watching the fading light play across the manicured landscape. The weight of the day, of the commitment she had made regardless of the unusual circumstances, settled over her. Having second thoughts already? Richard's voice cut into her reverie. Emma turned to face him, just reflecting on how quickly life can change. Indeed, Richard studied her with calculating eyes. The legal work is complete. As promised, the apartment on Marlborough Street is now in your name, along with an education trust and a modest investment portfolio. Whether you ultimately succeed with Nathan or not, those things are yours. Thank you, Emma said stiffly, uncomfortable with his businesslike approach to what was, to all outward appearances, his son's wedding day. Don't thank me yet, Richard warned. The harder part begins now. Nathan's compliance today was self-preservation, nothing more. The real test will be the day-to-day reality. I understand that. Richard nodded, satisfied. Diana has arranged for your belongings to be moved to Nathan's penthouse tomorrow. I've instructed him to return to classes on Monday. With that, he turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts once more. The penthouse on the 20th floor of a luxury building in Back Bay made the Barrett mansion seem almost modest by comparison. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Charles River, while sleek modern furnishings in cool grays and blues created an atmosphere of masculine sophistication. Home sweet home, Nathan announced as he dropped their bags in the foyer. Temporary home anyway. Emma took in the space. Immaculate, but impersonal, more showcase than sanctuary. How you don't consider this home? Nathan shrugged. It's where I live. Does that make it home? The question lingered between them as he showed her around. Spacious living area, gourmet kitchen that looked unused, master bedroom with an emperor-sized bed, guest room that would become hers, 3 bathrooms, and a study. I had them prepare the guest room for you, Nathan said, gesturing to the smaller bedroom. I assumed you wouldn't want to. That's fine, Emma agreed quickly. Thank you. Their first night as a married couple passed in awkward politeness, ordering takeout that they ate mostly in silence, retreating to their separate rooms early. Emma lay awake in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building, wondering what she had gotten herself into. Monday morning arrived with unexpected urgency. Emma woke to find Nathan already dressed in jeans and a Harvard Business School sweatshirt, looking at her door. Were you going to wake me? She asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I wasn't sure if I should, he admitted, but we need to leave in 30 minutes if I'm going to make my first class. Emma blinked in surprise. You're actually going to class? That was the deal, wasn't it? His tone was reluctant but resigned. Besides, my father has probably already called the professor to verify my attendance. While Nathan made coffee, Emma showered and dressed quickly, choosing a simple outfit from her new wardrobe. When she emerged, he handed her a travel mug without comment. The drive to Harvard's campus was tense but not hostile. Nathan navigated Boston's notoriously challenging streets with the same skill he'd demonstrated on the racetrack, though at considerably more reasonable speeds. What will you do while I'm in class? He asked as they approached the campus. I have an appointment with the admissions office, Emma replied. Your father arranged it. They're going to assess my knowledge level and discuss potential enrollment options. Nathan nodded, seeming genuinely curious. What will you study? Math? If they'll have me, she confirmed, though I'll probably need substantial remedial work first. He pulled into a parking space and turned off the engine. I'm done at 3, meet me here. I'll be waiting. As Nathan walked toward his classroom building, Emma watched him go, struck by how different he seemed already, less arrogant, more thoughtful. Perhaps there was hope for this strange arrangement after all. Over the next few weeks, a routine emerged. Nathan attended classes regularly, while Emma spent her days studying for placement exams and exploring the campus. Their evenings developed a comfortable rhythm, takeout dinners at first. Then gradually, Emma began cooking simple meals in the previously unused kitchen, discovering an unexpected talent for it. Where did you learn to cook like this? Nathan asked one night, savoring a perfectly prepared pasta dish. YouTube tutorials at the public library, Emma admitted. I couldn't afford to eat out, so I learned to make the most of cheap ingredients at the community kitchens. Nathan regarded her thoughtfully. You've had to learn everything the hard way, haven't you? Not everything, Emma replied. Some things I learned for the joy of learning. Mathematics, for instance. Later that evening, Nathan struggled with a complex financial modeling assignment. After watching him grow increasingly frustrated, Emma hesitantly offered to help. You think you can understand this better than me? Nathan scoffed, pride momentarily overriding his better nature. Emma shrugged. Maybe not the business context, but the mathematical framework. Yes. Reluctantly, Nathan pushed the laptop toward her. Emma studied the problem for several minutes, her brow furrowed in concentration, then began explaining the underlying equations with remarkable clarity. How do you do that? Nathan asked, genuinely impressed. See the patterns so quickly. Numbers have always made sense to me in a way people don't, Emma explained. They're predictable, logical, unlike humans who say one thing and mean another. Nathan was quiet for a moment. I think I owe you an apology for how I've behaved. You didn't ask for this situation any more than I did. No apology necessary, Emma replied. We're making the best of it. As weeks turned into months, the transformation in Nathan became increasingly evident. He not only attended classes but participated actively, discovering that he actually enjoyed the intellectual challenge when he applied himself. His professors noted the dramatic improvement in his work, and for the first time, he felt a sense of genuine accomplishment. Emma thrived as well. After acing her placement exams, she enrolled in several undergraduate mathematics courses, impressing her instructors with her intuitive understanding of complex concepts despite her irregular educational background. Their relationship evolved in unexpected ways. The initial awkwardness gave way to a tentative friendship built on mutual respect. They discovered shared interests beyond cars, classic films, strategy games, dry humor. Nathan taught Emma to swim in the building's rooftop pool. She helped him develop more effective study habits. Diana visited occasionally, delighted by the changes in her son and increasingly fond of Emma. She brought wedding photos one afternoon, showing Emma sitting stiffly beside Nathan, both wearing polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. You look so different now, Diana observed, watching them interact with easy familiarity. Both of you. Even Richard, during their mandatory Sunday dinners at the Barrett mansion, seemed pleased with Nathan's progress, though he remained coolly professional with Emma, as if she were still merely an employee fulfilling a contract. Then came the corporate gala, Richard's annual charity event for Boston's business elite. Nathan had always attended reluctantly and behaved poorly. This year, with Emma by his side, he approached it differently. You'll need something formal, he told her 2 weeks before the event, handing her a credit card. Get whatever you want. Emma shook her head. I have plenty of clothes now. Trust me, not for this. This is Harvard Club, old Boston money. They'll be looking for any reason to find you wanting. The concern in his voice touched her. Worried I'll embarrass you? No, Nathan said seriously. Worried they'll hurt you. These people are sharks. I should know, I used to be one of them. The night of the gala, Emma emerged from her room in a midnight blue gown that accentuated her slender frame, her auburn hair styled in an elegant updo. Nathan, adjusting his bow tie in the hallway mirror, turned and froze at the sight of her. You look, he began, then shook his head, unable to find adequate words. Thank you, Emma replied softly, equally struck by his transformation from reckless boy to composed man in the months they'd been together. You clean up pretty well yourself, Barrett. At the Harvard Club, heads turned as they entered. Emma felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whispers about Nathan's mysterious new wife, but with his hand steady against the small of her back, she held her head high. Nathan, darling. A leggy blonde approached, air-kissing both his cheeks while eyeing Emma speculatively. Where have you been hiding? No one's seen you at Le Bain in ages. I've been busy, Vanessa, Nathan replied evenly. May I introduce my wife, Emma? Vanessa's perfect eyebrows arched in surprise. Wife? My goodness, how sudden. Sometimes you just know, Nathan said, his arm sliding protectively around Emma's waist. Throughout the evening, Emma watched Nathan navigate the social landscape with newfound grace, no longer the belligerent troublemaker these people remembered. When Richard called him to the stage to announce Nathan's recent appointment as junior project manager at Barrett Construction, the pride in Nathan's eyes was unmistakable. Later, as they danced, Emma felt something shift between them, something deeper than partnership or friendship. "Thank you," Nathan murmured against her ear. "For what?" "For changing everything." Spring blossomed in Boston, bringing with it a gentle warmth that seemed to reflect the atmosphere in the Barrett penthouse. Nearly 8 months had passed since the unlikely wedding, transforming what had begun as a cold business arrangement into something neither Emma nor Nathan had anticipated. On a sunny Saturday morning, Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by textbooks and notes, preparing for her final exams. She had surprised everyone, perhaps even herself, by qualifying for an accelerated mathematics program that would allow her to complete her undergraduate degree in just 2 years. Nathan emerged from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee, carefully stepping around her organized chaos to hand her one. "Thanks," she said, smiling up at him. He settled on the couch behind her, unconsciously resting his hand on her shoulder as he reviewed documents for work. The casual intimacy of the gesture wasn't lost on either of them, though neither acknowledged it aloud. Their relationship had evolved into something that defied simple categorization. They still maintained separate bedrooms, yet spent most of their waking hours together by choice rather than obligation. They had developed inside jokes, shared routines, and an ability to communicate through glances that often confused others. "What time is your meeting with my father?" Emma asked, glancing at the clock. 11, Nathan replied, tension evident in his voice. "He's announcing the executive restructuring today." Richard had been increasingly impressed with Nathan's dedication to Barrett construction over the past months. Starting as a junior project manager, Nathan had quickly demonstrated not only competence but innovation, suggesting sustainable building practices that had won the company accolades and new clients. Emma squeezed his hand reassuringly. "You've earned this, Nathan. Your father knows it." "I'm not sure he'll ever see me as anything but the disappointment he had to fix," Nathan admitted, vulnerability showing through his usual confidence. "Then he's not paying attention," Emma replied simply. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken in his gaze. "Would you—" He hesitated. "Would you come with me? To the meeting?" The request surprised her. "Are you sure? Wouldn't that seem unprofessional?" "You're my wife," Nathan said, the word carrying more weight than it once had. "And honestly, I could use the moral support." 2 hours later, they sat side by side in Richard's opulent office as he outlined the company's new organizational structure. Emma noticed the subtle changes in Nathan's posture as his father detailed the expanded responsibilities he would be taking on as newly appointed Executive Vice President of Operations. "The Matthews project will be your first solo lead," Richard concluded, sliding a folder across his desk. "30 million budget, 18-month timeline, full creative control on the architectural elements." Nathan accepted the folder with steady hands, his expression controlled, but his eyes betraying his excitement. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't disappoint you." Richard nodded briskly. "See that you don't." He turned to Emma. "And how are your studies progressing?" "Very well, thank you," she replied politely. "I've been invited to join a research team next semester." "Excellent. Perhaps you're both finally living up to your potential." The backhanded compliment hung in the air as Richard's assistant entered with an urgent message. "Mr. Barrett, Mr. Schneider is on line 1 from Berlin. He says it's regarding the international expansion." Richard's expression sharpened with interest. "I need to take this." "We'll discuss the details of your new position on Monday, Nathan." As they drove home, Nathan's initial excitement about his promotion gradually gave way to thoughtful silence. Emma knew better than to press him. He would share when ready. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, another routine they'd fallen into naturally, Nathan finally spoke. "My father mentioned Schneider today. Klaus Schneider, head of the largest construction firm in Germany." Emma nodded, slicing vegetables with practiced precision. "I gathered it was important from his reaction. He's been trying to negotiate a partnership for years. European expansion has been his dream for the last decade." Nathan paused, setting down the wine glasses he'd been arranging. "And Klaus has a daughter, Ingrid. 26, Oxford-educated, runs their Asian operations." Something in his tone made Emma look up sharply. "Why are you telling me this?" Nathan leaned against the counter, his expression troubled. "Last year, before us, My father suggested a merger of more than just businesses. He thinks a marriage would solidify the partnership. The knife in Emma's hand stilled. I see. I refused at the time, Nathan continued hurriedly. I wasn't interested in arranged marriages then. The irony of his statement hung between them. And now? Emma asked, her voice carefully neutral. Now it's complicated, Nathan answered, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Now, I'm already married. To someone who was essentially hired to reform you, Emma reminded him, resuming her chopping with more force than necessary. Our situation is different. Is it? Nathan challenged, moving closer. Is that all this is to you? A job? Emma set the knife down and turned to face him fully. You know it's not, but that doesn't change the facts. Your father made a business arrangement, and I fulfilled my end. You're no longer the irresponsible playboy he was ashamed of. You've proven yourself as an executive, mission accomplished. And what about us? Nathan asked quietly. What we've built here. Emma hesitated, wanting to acknowledge the connection that had grown between them, but afraid to make herself vulnerable. We've become friends. That's more than either of us expected. Friends, Nathan repeated, disappointment evident in his voice. Is that what you think we are? The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Emma opened her mouth to respond when Nathan's phone rang, his father's ringtone. Nathan answered with a clipped, "Hello?" His expression changed as he listened, eyes finding Emma's. "Yes, she's here with me. Dinner tomorrow night? I'll have to check." He paused, listening again. "Yes, I understand it's important. We'll be there." He ended the call with a frown. "What is it?" Emma asked, concern replacing their momentary tension. "My father wants us both at the mansion for dinner tomorrow. He was insistent. Wouldn't say why." "That's unusual." "Very," Nathan agreed, "and he specifically asked about you. Twice." The next evening they arrived at the Barrett mansion to find not only Richard and Diana waiting, but also a distinguished silver-haired man and an elegant young woman, both with distinctly German accents. "Nathan, Emma," Richard greeted them with unusual warmth, "allow me to introduce Klaus Schneider and his daughter Ingrid. They're in Boston for the week to finalize our partnership agreement." Emma felt Nathan tense beside her as they exchanged pleasantries. Ingrid Schneider was striking, tall, blonde, impeccably dressed and clearly intelligent. Throughout dinner, she engaged Nathan in conversation about international business trends, her expertise evident. Emma contributed when appropriate, but found herself increasingly withdrawn as the meal progressed. The dynamic at the table was unmistakable. Richard and Klaus speaking of their company's future together, Diana charming in her role as hostess, and Ingrid demonstrating why she would be the perfect partner for an ambitious young executive. After dinner, while the men retired to Richard's study, Diana suggested the women take coffee in the conservatory. As they settled among the exotic plants, Ingrid turned her penetrating gaze to Emma. "Richard tells me you were homeless before you met Nathan," she said directly. "That must have been challenging." Emma met her gaze steadily. "It was, but adversity builds character." "Indeed," Ingrid agreed. "And now you're studying mathematics? How unusual." "We can't all be international business experts," Emma replied with a small smile. Diana intervened smoothly, changing the subject, but the subtext was clear. Emma didn't belong in this world, and everyone knew it. Later, as they prepared to leave, Richard asked Nathan to remain behind for a private conversation. "Just business matters," he assured Emma with an artificial smile. "We'll have him home to you shortly." Emma waited in the car, stomach knotting with dread. When Nathan finally emerged from the house 30 minutes later, his expression was thunderous. The drive home was silent until they reached the privacy of their penthouse. As soon as the door closed behind them, Nathan exploded. "He wants to end our marriage," he said, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "Says he's eternally grateful for how you've helped me, but now that I've proven myself, it's time to make strategic decisions for the future of the company." Emma stood perfectly still, absorbing the blow she'd been half expecting since the previous night. The strategic decision being Ingrid Schneider. Exactly. Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "He's already spoken to his lawyers about the fastest way to arrange a divorce. Says since our marriage is so new and obviously arranged, it should be simple. He'll honor all financial commitments to you, of course." Emma felt simultaneously numb and hyper-aware, noting with detached precision how the setting sun cast long shadows across the penthouse floor. "What did you say?" Nathan stopped pacing to look at her. "I told him I'd discuss it with my wife." "I see." Emma moved to the window, needing distance to think clearly. "And what do you want to discuss?" "Are you seriously asking me that?" Nathan's voice rose in frustration. "Do you think I want to divorce you to marry some woman I just met because it would be good for business?" "It would be more than good for business," Emma pointed out logically, though her heart was racing. "It would be transformative for Barrett Construction. International expansion, doubled resources, new markets. I don't care about that." "You should," Emma said quietly. "It's your legacy, your future." Nathan moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth without touching. "What about our future?" Emma closed her eyes briefly. "Nathan, your father was clear from the beginning. I was brought in to help you become the man you needed to be. I've done that. Maybe this is where our paths were always meant to diverge." "That's bullshit and you know it," Nathan replied, gently turning her to face him. "What happened between us wasn't part of any plan. It wasn't in the contract." Emma finally met his gaze, allowing herself to acknowledge the depth of feeling that had developed between them. "No, it wasn't. I'm not letting my father dictate my personal life." "Not again," Nathan said firmly. "But I need to know where you stand." "What do you want, Emma?" The question hung between them, weighted with months of unspoken emotions and possibilities. Emma had spent her entire life surviving, never daring to want more than her immediate needs met. Now, faced with the question directly, she found herself speechless. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I never expected any of this. I never expected you." Nathan's expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. "Then maybe it's time we both figure out what we really want. Not what my father wants or what circumstances dictated. Just us." As his fingers traced her jawline, Emma felt the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. The protection those walls offered had kept her alive on the streets, but now they were keeping her from truly living. "I need time," she whispered. Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We have time. I'm not going anywhere." But as Emma retreated to her room that night, Richard's words echoed in her mind. She had fulfilled her purpose. The contract was complete. And while Nathan might be willing to defy his father now, what about in a year, 2 years? Would he grow to resent passing up this opportunity? Would he eventually see her as the obstacle that prevented his company's greatest expansion? These thoughts circled relentlessly as she opened her laptop and found herself looking at the details of the Marlborough Street apartment Richard had put in her name. Her safety net, her escape route, her proof that she would never again be at the mercy of circumstances beyond her control. By morning, Emma had made her decision. The Marlborough Street apartment was beautiful. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, elegant pre-war details preserved amid modern updates. Standing in the empty living room, Emma traced her fingers along the marble fireplace mantel, trying to imagine herself building a life here, alone. She had left the penthouse early that morning, while Nathan was still asleep, leaving only a brief note. "I need space to think. I'll call you." Now, as afternoon light streamed through tall windows, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Her phone had been buzzing relentlessly. Calls and messages from Nathan that she couldn't bring herself to answer. Not yet. Not until she was certain. A knock at the door startled her. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Opening it hesitantly, she was surprised to find Diana Barrett standing in the hallway. "May I come in?" Diana asked gently. Emma stepped aside wordlessly, closing the door behind her unexpected visitor. "Nathan is frantic," Diana said without preamble. "He came to the house looking for you." "I left a note," Emma replied defensively. "I just needed time to think." Diana nodded, looking around the empty apartment. "And you came here to do that thinking, to the escape hatch Richard provided." Emma flinched at the accuracy of the assessment. "It's practical to consider all options." "Indeed," Diana agreed, moving to the window. "I've always been a practical woman myself. It served me well in many ways." She turned back to Emma with unexpected intensity. "And cost me dearly in others." "What do you mean?" Diana sighed, seeming to choose her words carefully. "When I married Richard, I thought I knew exactly what I was getting into. A business partnership, essentially. He needed a socially appropriate wife to advance his career. I needed financial security after my family lost everything. Sound familiar? Emma nodded slowly. But you stayed together. Had Nathan? We did, Diana confirmed. And over time our arrangement evolved into something like love. Not the passionate kind from romance novels, but a steady companionship built on mutual respect and shared goals. She paused. It was enough until it wasn't. Emma waited, sensing there was more to the story. When I got pregnant with Nathan, there were complications, Diana continued. After he was born, the doctors told me I couldn't have more children. Richard was disappointed. He'd wanted a large family, a dynasty. But we adapted, focused all our attention on our son. She moved closer to Emma, her expression softening. What I'm trying to say is that I understand practical decisions. I've made them my whole life. But I've watched you and Nathan these past months, and what's growing between you isn't practical. It's rare and precious. It's also complicated, Emma countered. So your husband made it very clear that I've served my purpose. Diana's expression hardened. Richard has always believed he can control everything and everyone around him. He arranged your marriage because he couldn't bear to see Nathan wasting his potential. Now he wants to arrange a divorce because he sees an opportunity for expansion. Isn't that what's best for Nathan's future? For the company? Perhaps for the company, Diana allowed. But for Nathan? That's not for Richard to decide. She reached for Emma's hand. And it's not for you to decide either by disappearing. Emma felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I'm scared, she admitted. I've never had anything worth losing before. And that's exactly why you shouldn't run away, Diana replied softly, not without at least talking to him first. After Diana left, Emma sat alone in the empty apartment for hours, wrestling with her fears and hopes. As dusk fell, she finally reached for her phone and typed a simple message. I'm at the Marlborough apartment, can we talk? Nathan arrived in less than 20 minutes, breathless as if he'd run up the stairs. His hair was disheveled, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. You left, he said, the hurt in his voice unmistakable. I needed to think, Emma replied, standing her ground, despite the guilt twisting inside her. This is a lot to process. So you just disappeared instead of talking to me? Nathan's voice rose in frustration. Do you have any idea how worried I was? I left a note. A note? Nathan ran his hands through his hair in agitation. 4 words on a post-it isn't a conversation, Emma. We're supposed to be partners. We face things together. The word partners hung in the air between them. Not business associates, not a convenient arrangement, but equals sharing life's challenges. I'm sorry, Emma said quietly. I've spent my entire life handling problems alone. It's hard to remember I don't have to anymore. Nathan's expression softened. He moved closer, but didn't touch her, respecting the distance she had created. Is that what I am? A problem to handle? No, Emma replied immediately. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. That's what scares me. I don't understand. Emma paced the empty room, struggling to articulate feelings she'd never had to confront before. Your father made it clear I was temporary, a stepping stone to get you where you needed to be, and now there's Ingrid, who makes perfect sense for you professionally. I don't want Ingrid, Nathan said firmly. Maybe not today, Emma countered, but what about next year? 5 years from now? When you're facing your father across the boardroom table, explaining why Barrett Construction isn't expanding into Europe. Nathan's jaw tightened. Is that what you think of me? That I'd trade our marriage for a business deal? I think you've worked incredibly hard to earn your father's respect, to prove yourself worthy of the company's legacy. I don't want to be the reason you lose that. And I don't want to be the kind of man who puts business before his heart, Nathan replied, closing the distance between them. Emma, look at me, please. Reluctantly, she met his gaze. When my father first brought you into my life, I was furious. I thought it was just another way for him to control me. Nathan's voice was low, intense. But something happened that neither of us expected. You didn't just help me become a better businessman. You helped me become a better person. Not because you were trying to fulfill some contract, but because you saw something in me worth believing in. Emma felt her resolve weakening as Nathan gently took her hands in his. I love you, he said simply. Not because of some arrangement or because it's convenient. I love your brilliance, your strength, your quiet dignity. I love how you can solve complex equations and still get excited about cooking a perfect omelette. I love that despite everything the world has thrown at you, you still have the capacity to care so deeply. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. Nathan, let me finish, he said softly. I know you're scared. So am I. But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of facing my father or giving up some business deal. What about Barrett Construction? Your legacy. We'll build our own legacy, Nathan said with quiet conviction. I've learned more from you than my father ever taught me. If he can't accept us, then we'll start something new. Together. Emma searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she finally allowed herself to say the words she'd been holding back for months. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since that first race, when you looked at me like I was someone worth seeing. Nathan's smile transformed his face as he pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was different from the polite peck at their wedding. This was real, full of promise and shared understanding. When they finally separated, Emma rested her forehead against his. So what now? Now we go home, Nathan said. And tomorrow we face my father together. The following morning they arrived at Richard Barrett's office hand in hand, a united front. Richard looked up from his desk, unsurprised to see them. I assumed you'd come, he said coolly. Diana mentioned she'd spoken with Emma. We need to talk, Nathan began, but Richard held up his hand. Before you say anything, you should know the Schneider deal is already signed. Klaus and Ingrid flew back to Berlin this morning. Nathan blinked in confusion. What? But I thought that I needed you to marry Ingrid to secure the partnership. Richard leaned back in his chair, a hint of amusement in his eyes. That was never a requirement. Klaus and I finalized the terms months ago, the dinners, the introductions. That was Diana's idea. Mom's idea? Nathan repeated, bewildered. Richard nodded. She thought it would clarify your feelings. He glanced at their joined hands. Apparently she was right. Emma felt like the room was tilting beneath her feet. So, this was all a test? To see if Nathan would choose me or the business opportunity? Not a test, Richard corrected. A catalyst. I needed to know if the changes in Nathan were genuine or merely a performance to secure his inheritance. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. A man who would sacrifice love for business advantage is not the kind of leader Barrett Construction needs. Nathan stared at his father in disbelief. You manipulated us. Again. I presented a choice, Richard countered. You made the right one. He looked directly at Emma for the first time. And you. I expected you to take the apartment and the money and leave at the first opportunity. It would have been the practical decision. Some things matter more than practicality, Emma replied steadily. Something like respect flickered in Richard's eyes. Indeed. He rose from his desk. The executive position is still yours, Nathan, if you want it. And Emma, Diana mentioned you might be interested in developing a mathematical modeling program for our architectural division after you complete your degree. They left the office in stunned silence, processing the unexpected turn of events. In the elevator, Nathan finally burst into surprised laughter. All this time I thought I was rebelling against my father by choosing you, he said, shaking his head in wonder. Turns out that's exactly what he wanted. He's more complicated than I gave him credit for, Emma admitted. We all are, Nathan replied, pulling her close. But some things are beautifully simple. I love you. You love me. The rest we'll figure out together. 3 years later, Emma stood at the window of their brownstone in Cambridge, watching snow fall softly on their quiet street. Her dissertation on mathematical applications in sustainable architecture lay completed on her desk, while advanced degrees from Harvard hung on the wall beside Nathan's. Barrett Construction had expanded successfully into Europe under Nathan's leadership, while Emma's modeling program had revolutionized the company's approach to environmentally conscious building. Richard had taken a step back from day-to-day operations, finding in semi-retirement a new appreciation for family over business. Diana visited often, doting on her first grandchild, a bright-eyed 1-year-old girl who already showed signs of inheriting both her parents' determination and intelligence. Emma felt Nathan's arms slide around her waist as he joined her at the window, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How different life would be if your father hadn't found me on that street corner," she replied. "If he hadn't made his unusual proposition. We would have found each other somehow," Nathan said with certainty. "Some connections are inevitable." Emma turned in his arms, remembering the lost, angry young man she'd first met, and marveling at the thoughtful, passionate partner he'd become. "Do you ever regret it?" "Our unconventional beginning? Not for a second," Nathan replied, kissing her forehead. "The best journeys rarely follow a straight line." As they stood together, watching the snow transform their world into something new and beautiful, Emma reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here, from abandoned child to homeless young woman to respected mathematician and beloved wife and mother. What had begun as a cold business arrangement had blossomed into the family she'd never dared to dream of. Some might call it luck, others destiny. Emma preferred to think of it as mathematical probability, an unlikely outcome that, given the right variables, became not just possible but inevitable. "I love you," she whispered to the man who had changed her life as much as she had changed his. "And I love you," Nathan replied. Against all odds. Dear listeners, we hope Nathan and Emma's journey from reluctant arrangement to genuine love has moved you. For more emotionally rich stories like this one, check out our special playlist by clicking the link on your left. If you enjoyed this tale of transformation and unexpected connection, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexities and the power of human connection. Join us in the comments section to share your thoughts and stay tuned for our next captivating narrative. We can't wait to take you on another emotional journey.